Look on your social media feeds. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's Krypton's Legacy, a Superman podcast, covering all of Clark Kent's greatest adventures in comics, film, and animation, with your hosts, Adam and Nick. In this episode, the Emerald Enthusiast fills in for Nick.
Welcome to another episode of Krypton's Legacy, a Superman podcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam, and with me is my co-host, the Emerald Enthusiast himself, Donnie. Donnie, how's it going?
Hey, what's up, everyone out there listening to this podcast? It's the Emerald Enthusiast, and we are having technical problems. You can't see me, but I'll give you as much energy as I can through the podcast mic.
Yes, I'd like to, for the purposes, if you're watching on YouTube, you're probably seeing imagery from My Adventures of Superman. And that is because Skype is doing Skype things, as we say, yes. But for the purposes of the show that we're on, let's just say that Brainiac is causing problems, and let's call it a day. For that, because nobody really cares about our technical difficulties. All they want to hear us talk about is Superman on this show, and that's what we're going to do. Specifically, the brand new show that just wrapped its first season of 10 episodes, My Adventures with Superman, which airs on Adult Swim and HBO Max.
Yes.
Now,
first on Adult Swim, and then HBO Max shortly thereafter.
Now, Donnie, before we get into the actual show itself, as you and I and all the co-hosts on this network do, when there is news that is percolating around the IP that we're discussing, we share that news, and more specifically, our opinion of that news. Mm-hmm. Now, on our other podcast, the Emerald Echo, a Green Lantern podcast,
which is available right here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe today. That's the Emerald Echo podcast that covers the adventures of all of your favorite ring slingers.
Which is also a vidcast when the technology cooperates. But on that show, we talked about the addition of Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner Green Lantern to Superman Legacy. Mm-hmm. We also have a couple of additions to the cast, which we haven't talked about, which are the characters of Metamorpho, Mr. Terrific, and one of my recently discovered multiverse wives, Isabella Merced, as Hawkgirl. And just for posterity's sake, I don't know if y'all can hear it, but I just clicked the pen.
That's a pen click, yeah.
Yes. All right. So you heard it. Good. What do you let's talk about, what do you think about the addition of these DC heroes to the cast of Superman Legacy and the world?
With Metamorpho, I hope that they have the money and the expertise to do that character correctly. That could be some pretty complex visuals.
Anthony Kerrigan, which was who he was Zaz on Gotham, is playing Metamorpho. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not the acting that I'm worried about.
Yeah. I think Mr. Kerrigan is going to do just fine. He's a fantastic character actor, and I have no doubt about his ability to perform. What do you think of Mr. Terrific, who is played by an actor whose name I cannot pronounce, but we've seen him in X-Men First Class. He was Darwin, and he met an early, untimely end on that film. But what do you think of the inclusion of Mr. Terrific?
That's another character that I like a lot. We saw a version of him in the Arrowverse. And he, he's a really interesting character. He obviously understands a lot of like super technological aspects of the DC universe. We could use them right now to fix our cameras.
I was just going to say, I wish you could help you out there over there.
Yeah. I wish he was. But yeah, Mr. Terrific has worked with a lot of DC heroes over the years, and so yeah, I like the idea of, he is a very analytical character, so I could see he and Guy having some very interesting exchanges. Yeah. Whereas Guy is a much more instinctual character, I could see he and Mr. Terrific having some really, really interesting screen time together. So,
yeah, and then also thoughts on Hawkgirl as a character showing up in this film and new universe.
I always liked Hawkgirl too. I've sometimes I get in like little arguments with some DC fans who always want John with Hawkgirl. And I'm like, no, there are some more love interests out there than just Hawkgirl. But obviously, we won't have that here, at least in the beginning. And yeah, that's another character. Again, she also showed up in the Arrowverse. And Hawkman and Hawkgirl are two characters I think that have been underrepresented until recently as far as live action goes. So I think this is another way to reintroduce people to those characters and get them as mainstays in this new continuity that we're embarking upon.
And I think what they'll be, I don't think these DC Universe characters will occupy an enormous amount of screen time in the film, because James Gunn has said that, because you fans, being fans, their first inclination is to worry and think, oh my God, there's all these characters. I thought this was a Superman movie. To which James Gunn replied, I don't just throw characters into a movie to satisfy what's coming next. I put them in a movie only if they serve the story I'm telling. And he also pointed out that I'm trying to tell a complete Clark Kent Superman story, and I want to serve both the colleagues that he has at the Daily Planet and then the colleagues that he has in the superhero community. And by introducing both or having both gives you a full picture of the life of Clark Kent / Superman. So I like his reasoning. And if you watch the Guardians films, I should say, James Gunn doesn't just, concern himself with, well, I got to put this cameo, that cameo, and this cameo into service, whatever MCU film is coming next. Everybody that was in those Guardians movies had a purpose for those stories. So I believe him when he says what he said. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm not concerned. I mean, depending on the filmmaker, I might be concerned. But given what I've seen from James Gunn in the superhero space, he can handle ensemble casts very well. So it isn't a concern. And I kind of like that. If you look at the mix of characters that at least we know about right now, it seems very akin to the DC animated universe, the one that was under the care of Bruce Timm and Paul Dini back in the day.
Right, which was universally popular,
Right.
At least at the time. Now, granted, there have been some critics who have come out since then, and that's to be expected. But I don't remember nearly as much disagreement and division among fans at that period as there was over a lot of the live action efforts from Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and to me, look, if I know this is a popular phrase that I often mock, but if you're looking for a blueprint for the DC universe, the DC animated universe that comprised of Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League, and Batman Beyond the Green Lantern, that's a pretty damn fine blueprint if you ask me. Mm-hmm. So if he's pulling from that in any way, shape, or form, where do I sign? That's my take on it. So yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued that we're getting a living, breathing DC universe, as we talked about when we talked about Guy Gardner's inclusion. It's vastly different than what we got with Man of Steel, which was a solo effort, and then was morphed into a shared universe to catch up with Marvel because the Avengers had made $1 billion back in what was it, 2013 or whatever it was.
If Mr. Terrific becomes really popular in Superman Legacy, they need to sell those jackets, the Fair Play jackets.
Oh, I'd buy one. Oh, yes. I'd buy one, and I'm sure you'd be waiting on the figure as you want to do, right? Yeah, I'm sure. So yeah, interesting times. Unfortunately, we don't have any more casting to share with you because the Hollywood is in the midst of strike mode. Right. And here's what I'll say about that is I really want to hear more casting. Like, I want to know who's playing Jimmy Olsen. Giancarlo Esposito came out recently. He was at a convention and he said before the strike he was in talks with James Gunn to join his DC universe. So I'd like to know who.
Oh man, wouldn't that be a massive get for James Gunn?
Look, I don't even care. I don't even care who he plays.
Yeah, exactly. Just bring him in. I mean, he's played so many different roles over the years.
Like, to me, he could play Jim Gordon. He can play Martian Manhunter. He can play
Ganthet.
Yeah. He can play Kilowog for all I care. I don't care. You just get somebody of that caliber, and Perry White. I don't really doesn't matter. When you have somebody of that caliber, it's a welcome addition. So I really would like to know who he's playing. So my urge to both the writers, the actors, and the producers is let's get a fair deal in place so that James Gunn can get back to the business of finishing off the casting and making this Superman legacy, because
it's fitting that you say that. Fair play, fair pay.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I want a fair deal for all sides.
Yes.
That's what it should be. So get it done so that we can get back to the business of talking about who James Gunn is casting next. And so get that done. But that's all the news we really have, Donnie. And the other thing is, before we transition into My Adventures with Superman, is that following the finale, they released a video saying that My Adventures of Superman Season 2 is currently in production.
Yes, and I have seen that graphic on Cartoon Network, and that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was coming back, but I would assume that the voice work for the most part has already been done. And now it's down to animation, which takes the longest. So season 2 should not really be affected by the current strikes that are going on. Mm-hmm. But it's good to know we have more of this iteration of Superman on the horizon. But, and of course, as we know more about Season 2, we'll share that news with you right here on this podcast. But that brings the news portion of the show to a close. We're going to take a quick break, and then on the other side of that break, we are going to talk about My Adventures of Superman, or My Adventures with Superman, I should say, Season 1. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
What's up, everyone? It's the Emerald Enthusiast. For all of your multiverse viewing and listening needs, check out our shows, which include Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, Power Rangers, the Marvel Universe, and the DC Universe, including the Emerald Echo podcast. You can check us out on Podbean, and remember to subscribe right here on YouTube. That's the Multiverse Musings Podcast Network. From the first podcast to the last.
And we're back.
Indeed we are, and as promised, we are heading to Metropolis to discuss My Adventures with Superman Season 1. So, Donnie, give us some of the particulars regarding this show.
Well, we have cast members Jack Quaid as Clark Kent, Alice Lee as Lois Lane, Ishmael Saeed as Jimmy Olsen. We have Reed Scott as Jonathan Kent. We have Joel De La Fuente as General Sam Lane. We have, what was that other one here? Jake Green as Ivo. And we have as Martha, why did you say that name? Kent, we have Terry Walgren.
I was waiting for it, and I'm glad you saved the best for last.
Yeah, you knew it had to be done.
Because that truly is the lasting legacy of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. Is it allowed Donnie to have this long-running 7 or 8 year gag of every time somebody says Martha?
That's forever. That's Yeah.
From the
also,
first
Deborah Wilson as Amanda Waller. I really like Deborah Wilson.
Yeah,
been a fan of hers for many years. So
indeed. So yeah, a really strong voice cast, adding life to these characters. What I find really interesting about this interpretation, Donnie, is, and I was actually, when this show was first announced, of course I was going to watch it because it's Superman, and he's one of my top 2 characters in all the fiction. You can guess who the other one is. If you don't know by now, what have we been doing for the last how many years we've been podcasting? But he's one of my top 2 characters in fiction, so I was going to watch it, of course. But
it's Shawn Michaels, right?
No, it's definitely not Shawn Michaels. I'll tell you that much. This character would probably punch Shawn Michaels in the face. And no, I'm not talking about Bret Hart either. Because he'd probably definitely punch Shawn Michaels in the face. But my skepticism came from mostly the animation point of view, because it is more anime/manga inspired, and that's typically not my cup of coffee, as I like to say. But it really worked, I think, for this iteration of the story. But what really kind of intrigued me is the youth of Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen.
Which I think definitely worked for this type of story. What they're telling here, them starting out, this definitely from the very first episode gives you the idea of a fresh start for these characters. And I mean that in a meta way too, not just for the characters within the story, but obviously we know that there has been lots of turmoil behind the scenes with the live action properties from Warner Brothers. And this feels like something that is very cohesive, that is very sure of itself, and has hit the ground running, and I think been a refreshing change of pace for a lot of fans.
Like the fact that they're interns at the Data Planet. And not as seasoned. But by them being interns, we get a lot of time at the Data Planet.
Yes.
Which I like.
And we're seeing, Superman just learning his powers, and he, just getting to know Lois And obviously there's an attraction there, and him being kind of very awkward around her. And also this version of Jimmy Olsen is an alien conspiracy theorist. And I think that made for a lot of funny gags throughout these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it fits. And the beauty of it, like, Jimmy is very much still Jimmy that we know and, that we know and love. But they've added some modern wrinkles to the character. Like, he has a blog, or a vlog, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Flamebird?
Yes, Flamebird, which comes into play in the last episode. We'll get to that.
Yeah. So, but the core essential elements that make Jimmy Olsen, were very much intact.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I watched that, like, if I had watched that and nobody had said, hey, this is Jimmy, or I had never seen a promotional image telling me that was Jimmy, within 3 minutes of watching, I'd figure out that, yeah, that's Jimmy. Like, it's very, the iconography of the character is strong within this interpretation. And I like that the creators of this show found a way to make him an integral part of the cast, and didn't say, well, Jimmy's useless, and so I'm going to shoot him in the head because I think it's cool. So good on Jimmy being present. And
you know what? I really like the outros where he's kind of walking through the screen, scrolling through his pictures. There's a very wholesome element there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Of what he's doing with his is reminiscing each day about his adventures with Clark and Lois and Perry White, who, by the way, I love Perry White's character in this too. He's doing his best to be professional, but he's really annoyed by that trio.
Yeah, the three of them are pains in the ass for him. Let's just call it what it is. But yeah, he's great. Again, like you touched on, having a Superman that is, in some cases, some of his powers are just coming to the forefront. And he's just discovering them, and we're seeing him work through those burgeoning powers. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like, we got Flash.
Not understanding them yet. Which, by the way, when we get to the end of this, I want to talk about my very favorite line in this so far, because it really hits at the heart of who Superman is.
Mm.
So, lots of really funny, really funny gags in this. Nothing inappropriate. I'm not exactly sure why it's on Adult Swim. It doesn't seem like something that would be inappropriate for, like, say, a 7 or 8 year old, maybe really young kids, but
that's a weird choice, but
yeah,
for whatever reason, they put it there. But it's like I like the early flashback to where I think we saw him fly for the first, or levitate for the first time.
And use his super speed to save a woman who was distracted driving.
Yes, that was cool. I really liked the incorporation of how they dealt with his Kryptonian heritage.
Yeah, definitely a different take on that. It wasn't something where he, kind of discovered it and, used the technology to, like, download all the information into himself, something like that. He kind of questions who he is and, what was Krypton's intentions? What was its intentions towards Earth and the rest of the universe? So, I like that he was, kind of slowly learning that and questioning that.
And I like that he, when he talks to the hologram of Jor-El, like, at least at the start, Jor-El isn't speaking English. Like they actually took the time to. I mean, I'm sure it's, and this is not an insult, I'm sure it's gibberish in reality, but the fact that they made the character speak Kryptonian, or Kryptonese, or however you would say it.
I believe it's Kryptonian. Yeah, I've never heard Kryptonese, but that's
whatever. However you want to frame it, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But like, I love that it was in English.
Yeah. Because I mean, it really stands to reason that he would have to give, the technology the directive of speak to me. Translate this, and from Krypton to English, that the technology wouldn't just pick up on that and instantly say, oh, this is what he is speaking here. You'd have to have some kind of directive for it.
Yeah. So I did like that that aspect of it, and again, it's not being laid out by Jor-El, at least that we know of, because we really can't understand them either. But it's not being laid out that, hey, I sent you here to do this, this, and this. Like, Clark has to figure out and decide what his purpose is. Mm-hmm. And he chooses to help others. Like, he makes the choice. It's not predestined that, you have to do this.
Right. And see, part 1 and part 2, they're titled The Adventures of a Normal Man. And he's trying to, kind of find his place. He's, trying to forge this professional identity and this identity outside of his powers. In fact, he says, just being a normal person. Oh, but I've got to go save this cat.
Yeah,
I'll do that. And then it gradually, his responsibility takes over as the series progresses. But we see that he's not already Superman. He's not already someone who's dealt with that. We're getting to see that in real time, his development from someone who's not exactly sure what this is about and who is dealing with this on his own in a lot of ways. And he's coming to terms with being Superman, as Lois dubs him in this series.
Yeah. Very well said.
And by the way, I know some people have criticized the way Lois looks in this. They're like, she's too young and she doesn't speak the way Lois should. And I'm like, no, but this is a younger version. I think I saw that Superman, or Clark, is 22 and she's 23.
Right.
And this is a modernized version of the character, but it's not out of character. It's like you said, like if I saw her, I instantly knew it was Lois just because of kind of how no nonsense she is and how driven she is. I'm like, well, that's Lois.
And it's 100% Lois. And another thing I heard was her hair's too short, and I'm like, Lois has had short hair before.
Yeah, whatever. Superman's had long hair before.
Right? Yeah,
had a glorious mullet back in the 90s.
Absolutely. It was only rivaled by Billy Ray Cyrus and his Achy Breaky Heart. No, but so I don't prescribe to that nonsense. I think she was very much Lois. What did you make of a version of Task Force X being the primary villains?
I like that they didn't instantly go to either Lex Luthor or General Zod. That's what I didn't want to see. I feel like Superman's mythos is one area that, even though Superman's been done well on film before, they haven't really spread out from a core number of characters. And the idea of Task Force X was familiar enough to audiences to get the idea of what it was, and then start to develop those characters instead of going right to, Superman's main arch nemesis characters. And I like that we saw again, characters like who am I thinking about? Leslie Willis. And is that who I'm thinking about? That Livewire, yeah. Characters like that we've seen before, but that haven't been, done over and over like Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
And characters like, Slade Wilson, for that matter. I mean, that is something that disappointed me about the DC extended universe, is that we never really got to see that played out. But we got to see these characters interacting again in a different way than we've seen them used before. And I think it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, a live wire, seeing a live wire is cool. Like you said, Deathstroke.
Intergang.
Intergang. I mean, but especially like if you think about Deathstroke, right? For example, a lot of people, there's this misconception, and it started, I think, because of the live action movies and what was planned. But there's this misconception that he's a Batman villain, and spoilers, he's not. He's an overall DC villain who has a lot of issues with specifically the Titans, but he's an overall DC villain. So to see him pop up here was pretty cool. Again, I think Livewire's a really cool character. I think that, if I'm remembering history correctly, she was created originally for the animated series, the original.
Yeah, she was another. She was one of those characters, a lot like Harley Quinn with the Timverse, where she became popular and they put her into the comics eventually.
Yeah.
And
so there's no reason that character can't have can't break out like Harley has. But I think she just needs more FaceTime with the audience, and I don't think she had the same level as Harley. Like even from the animated series from the 90s, Harley got a huge push, and Livewire hasn't really had that on in terms of eclipsing other media. Once I mean, yes, she's made it into the comics, but Harley's had a steady presence in the comics where Livewire is very sporadic. So I think DC would be wise to use Livewire more, because I think they could have another Harley Quinn on their hands if they played their cards right. So it's nice to see her from the hop, right off the hop here. And
they used her really well in the Supergirl show, so I like they're doing it. And we also saw Silver Banshee, and this version that we see, she shows up in episode 3, My Interview with Superman. This version of Siobhan McDougal is more grounded than what we saw, more grounded than the comics, really, but it still worked. Yeah, it was still an interesting character and a good threat to Superman. So
agreed. Now, what do you think about how the Intergang and Task Force X are kind of using Kryptonian tech?
Again, I like that everything is kind of, they're basically playing in their own sandbox right now. They're not bringing in too much, and they're not deluging people with too much DC history and too many kind of outside influences to where people feel like, oh, I can't watch this and understand that. They're bringing us along at a very deliberate pace. And I think that is satisfying to longtime fans, but at the same time, making new fans. And that's what DC Properties needs right now, is to solidify that base of people as they go forward into this, the new vision that they have for DC Properties outside of print.
Yeah, definitely. And what I found really interesting in terms of the villainry is, the combination of Dr. Evil, right, into a version of Parasite.
Right. And yes, that obviously that is different than the comics. But again, the way they did it, I thought was pretty seamless. It
made
still
sense.
Worked. It still worked for the story that they're telling. We still got the Parasite threat, but at the same time, we got some very understandable motivations for Dr. Ivo, who, he's a creepy character unto himself. So I wasn't like offended that he just basically made Parasite an armor. So, and here's the thing. Let's remember, even as he's learning his powers, we're talking about Superman. It's not easy to make credible threats. So sometimes you got to tweak things to make the story work.
And also, it's like, I don't know, like you said, you pointed out that you weren't offended. And I don't know why anybody should be, because, like, if you want more eyes on a villain, maybe, let's say that people who had never read a Superman comic before watch this show and are intrigued enough to go check out a comic. Maybe they'll stumble on the other versions of Parasite and discover that version. So.
That's a great point. Yeah.
There's no need to get offended, as long as it gets people in the door and gets them to explore other avenues of Superman. That's the point.
And we've seen Parasite done a lot in both animation and live action before.
Yeah.
So I don't think that people are going to look at that and say that it'll just be, the purists. And I know we all as longtime comic book fans have that inclination to be that way, but I don't think we need to be that way all the time. And I think it worked here. And plus, again, it's Parasite, and I'm not by no means am I disparaging the character, but it's not such a major character that I don't think you can play with that in the creative way they did here for this series. So
let me put it this way. So if I asked you, Donnie, and I am asking you, so answer the question.
Okay.
This is not hypothetical. It's actually a question. What, in your mind, what is the core essential element of Parasite?
That he drains people of their abilities and makes them weak and difficult to fight him.
Okay, does he do that in this show?
Yes, he does.
All right, case closed.
Right.
That's it, folks.
Yeah, he doesn't have to be a complex character. It's not, we're not dealing with somebody like Dr. Doom here. So
yeah, right, yeah. So yeah, to me, and I like in later episodes near the end, the Godzilla aspect, like he turned really big, like a kaiju.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, I want one of two things to happen. I want either like Godzilla to come in and help Superman out, or
wouldn't that be cool?
Or the Megazord from Power Rangers to come in and help Superman out. One of the neither happened, so that was a little disappointing. But I digress.
I can't wait for that crossover, Godzilla versus King Kong versus the Justice League. For sure. Yeah, ooh, that's going to be good.
Yeah, for sure. One of the episodes that really kind of struck me as really, really enjoyable was the League of Lois?
Yes. See, that was so much fun.
What a way to introduce the multiverse.
Yeah.
And Mixopedalecki, which, he was part of those shenanigans too. Yeah. And I'm not a fan, I'll be honest with you. In the pantheon of Superman villains, which are all, in my opinion, outside of the comic books, severely underserved. Mm-hmm. But in the pantheon of Superman villains, Mr. Mixopedalecki hasn't been one of my favorites ever. Okay, so
yeah, Mr. Mixopedalecki he's one of those characters that works on the page, but he's difficult to translate.
Yeah, so it was already when I found that he was going to be in an episode, I'm like, oh, all right. And so it was already coming at a disadvantage. But then they did it, and what they did with him, and I'm like, well, I'll be damned. I actually like this interpretation. And he uses Superman, right, to help him acquire.
Yeah, what was that, File X he was after?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's when Superman comes into contact with the League of Lois. But what I loved about that episode...
The League of Lois Lane. Say that 5 times really quickly.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, I was kidding.
The League of Lois Lanes, 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 the League of Lois Lanes.
You got it. You got it.
Now I can't breathe. I get to drink. But
we'll pause now while Adam takes some oxygen.
But what I liked about it was, I'm a sucker for multiverse shenanigans, but really, what I enjoyed was that it was a love letter to Superman and Lois Lane's history throughout animation.
So you're saying the League of Lois Lanes is a love letter? Now say that 5 times.
No, I'm not saying that 5. I don't get paid enough to say that 5 times. But like there was that scene where basically Mr. Mxyzptlk confronts Clark and says, "Yeah, I know you're Superman and I need your help." And he starts snapping his finger and he shows him the different Earth versions of himself.
Yes, including, we saw the Super Friends version, we saw the Timverse version.
Yes, we saw the Fleischer version.
The Fleischer version, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I was just like, I instantly, when all that stuff was going on, I instantly became that Leonardo DiCaprio gif on Twitter, where he's on the couch with a beer and he's pointing at the screen because that was me.
My mother found the Fleischer version for me, and this was years ago. This was like, and I'm a full-grown adult, by the way. And she was like, she found him in like a dollar store, and she was like, I don't know if you like this or not, but I thought, since you like superheroes, and I'm like, do you know what this is? Do you know how important this is? Of course I want this.
But you know what? They're so great. I mean, for back
that animation, that time period, it's amazing.
And just the rumors that we may see Superman in that outfit in Legacy, it's like, please. But
also that McFarlane figure of the first appearance, man, whoo, some nice looking stuff there.
That's pretty awesome. But so I love that episode. I thought it was great, and it's an easily digestible way to introduce the idea of the multiverse
without beating people over the head with it. Like I said, without deluging them, with too much information to where they feel like, oh, wait a minute, my head's spinning. What was that?
And then what you see with File X is that it's a file on an alternate Superman that is evil. And we see a visual of there's this device, this I'm assuming it's Kryptonian or futuristic or whatever, but it has, it's like a ball, and then it opens up and you see the hologram of whatever video it's trying to show you. And it shows Superman using his heat vision to cause destruction. And Lois sees that. She attempts to hide it.
Actually, what you're talking about is File X. That's what. Lois opens File X and she finds that it's an evil alternate version of Superman.
Yeah. And she tries to hide this info from Superman.
Right.
But he finds out.
Because obviously that's a much older version of Superman in there. She doesn't exactly know what to do with it at first. Is this something that she doesn't quite understand the multiverse yet, or is this something that is going to happen in their continuity, in their reality, or not?
Right.
So
but as soon as Superman catches sees that, he instantly becomes starts questioning himself. Like, was I sent here as a weapon?
Which is further enforced by the 0 Day flashbacks we get of a previous invasion of Kryptonians to Earth.
Right, yeah. And I'm intrigued by that Kryptonians were here long before, or not long before, but...
Well, I think it was 22 years, is something like that. That's what they said in the series.
So I wonder if they arrived with Superman's ship.
Yeah, I don't.
Or no, wait a minute. Depending how it all depends on how old he was when the Kents found them. Like that's
yeah.
Because
I'm pretty sure it was. So it would have been very close. It's interesting. It'd be interesting to see how they eventually answer that question. But yeah, it was because remember we saw like Amanda Waller and she was young.
Yeah.
When we saw the invasion, the 0 Day invasion, and obviously she is middle aged now.
Yeah.
In the current day. So
right.
Yeah.
And it's also an interesting dilemma that Clark and Lois love each other. She finds out, she knows that he's Superman, right? She finds out 4 episodes in, which was great because I think it allowed us to play a little bit with the Clark, Lois, and Superman love triangle, but not drag it out too long to the point where Lois Lane looks like the stupidest reporter in the history of reporters.
Yeah, I didn't want them to like do a bunch of misdirection and give us
red herring. I like that it was there because I don't like that her knowing right from the get-go. Like I think there needs to be some discovery, but I like that it was handled relatively quickly, right?
It didn't take over the storytelling to where that they were doing a whole bunch of like funny gags to try to convince her otherwise.
So like she knows he's Superman. They're in love, they're in a relationship, and all the while her father is heading up Task Force, or he's the point man for Task Force X, whose job it is to contain and capture Superman.
Right. Because he's convinced that Superman is, a part of the 0 Day happenings and that he is going to eventually, try to put Earth under his control.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And you understand that from once you see the 0 Day thing, it's not that, that he and Amanda Waller are just like randomly out there after aliens or whatever. It makes sense why they're doing what they're doing. They're just, at least Amanda Waller, she's not really listening to the voice of reason. You start to see General Lane start to question it a little bit and say, hey, because he sees the humanity in Superman after he captures him.
Yeah, you can, when you just get the, beginning of the story, if you put yourself in General Lane's shoes and Waller's shoes, you can understand their fear. Like it's not unfounded, right? But then General Lane gets to know Superman and realizes, hey, this isn't this guy isn't here to hurt us, and so I like that, but also. What was really emotionally moving was, I'm pretty sure it was the finale when was it the finale when the entire city helps Superman defeat Parasite?
No, I think that was like the 8th or 9th episode.
Okay, yeah, but that really was a standout episode for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lois makes an impassioned plea to the city after Vicky Vale puts out a story defaming Superman, right?
Yeah, there's a name we haven't heard outside of the comics for a while.
Yeah, and it was nice to see Vicky Vale. Even though this iteration was, how can I put this delicately? This iteration of Vicky Vale was a real witch. Subtract a W and add a B. But it's still, I enjoyed seeing her. And hey, Gotham City's out there, so who knows? At some point in the series, if there'll be a certain Cape Crusader introduced.
You got to believe that if this goes on for a couple of seasons, we're going to have to see Batman. It's kind of a given.
Look, I'm glad it wasn't right away because I want Superman to have his time to shine. But at some point, if this goes, 3, 4, 5 seasons, we're gonna have to have that meeting. But and maybe we'll get a new animated Martha moment for you to,
Martha. Why did you say that name, Kent?
Continue the legacy of that line. But no, the way she makes an impassioned plea to say, look, this is what Parasite is doing to Superman. We need you to cut the power to essentially stop Parasite from draining Superman, the city, and getting more powerful. And you'll help Superman defeat Parasite, and they do. And then Superman's able to gain the upper hand. So we've seen up to that point. I think you're right. It was 8 episodes of Superman saving the city, and then to see the city.
Yeah, it was actually in episode 9 where Lois is like, you've got to turn off all the power, and that will help weaken the Parasite armor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was just cool to see, the Metropolis save Superman, the reciprocation of what Superman's done for them, so many times, right? So that was always pretty cool. And then the finale, it really looked like we were getting a second Kryptonian invasion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's called Hearts of the Fathers.
Right. And you see clearly, and this is where General Lane sort of changes his tune when Superman makes the choice, and he seemingly chooses Earth. And
yeah. By the way, I really like the interactions at Thanksgiving where General Lane was like, haven't I seen you somewhere before?
Yeah, and how Clark is freaking out and pulls Jimmy in. And says, he's the general, and how am I supposed to deal with this? And Jimmy's so overwhelmed that Jonathan Kent pulls him aside and is like, just help me with the turkey. Just focus. The coping mechanism is just focus on the turkey, But
again, and very organic humor there. It wasn't. Yeah, they weren't trying to inject a bunch of jokes to, point at that and say, we're going to throw these in so it's not too grim and dire here. This is all stuff. They had some pretty, weighty themes at times, but it was done in an overall lighthearted framework that worked seamlessly.
Right, and even from the beginning of the season, right up until the final episode, with seemingly the second Kryptonian invasion, we see Superman, for lack of a better terminology, fighting robots from start to finish to a degree, and that's cool because in early comics and in early episodes of the Fleischer cartoon, that was one of Superman's nemesis is robots and
well, the early appearances, they didn't have a lot of characters fleshed out yet.
Yeah, so that was cool. Yeah.
I like the OMAC robots that we saw in episode 6. Also with Monsieur Mala and the Brain. That's a very interesting relationship in DC Comics history, and that was a really interesting. I was a little disappointed at the beginning because I thought at the end of episode 5 that it was Gorilla Grodd.
Yes.
So, but the way that played out, I did like that episode, and the way that things kind of went with the wormhole.
Yes.
And seeing the relationship with Mala and the Brain. So yeah, I liked how it eventually turned out after feeling a little let down that we didn't see Grodd. So,
and that's a really deep cut too, to go, so it shows the people behind the show are comics fans as well, which is nice.
That's a good point. Like I said, they gave us the flavor of DC history without, just bombarding us with that to make us feel that, you have to know all of these other things outside of what's going on to understand what's going on,
Right.
Yeah, they bring you along at an appropriate pace.
And then there's a tease at the end of the finale where it seems like Superman, has, won the day and repelled, the evil forces, the attacks.
Yeah, and Jimmy becomes a millionaire by selling Flamebird to the Daily Planet.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about earlier. I just like how nonchalant he was. He was like, "Oh yeah, I sold it for what was it, like $7 million or something." I think I'd be a little happier.
You'd think so.
You know how many figures I would buy with $7 million?
I was gonna ask, what would you do with that kind of money? And I just got my answer.
I would definitely try to do some.
Donnie would buy a new home, so you can fit more figures in there.
Yeah, I would probably buy a separate building for my figures. Yeah, I will. I'm going to be honest there, but yeah, my first thing would be to do things like clothe the poor and feed the hungry, because there's more to life than just you.
Oh, so. You'd still have plenty left over for figures.
Yeah, exactly. So.
But no, the tease I'm talking about was the seemingly Brainiac and Zod.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't name Zod, but you kind of get the idea that was Zod at the end. Yeah,
he says Neil.
Yeah, he says Neil. So I mean, that was when we say Neil, we don't mean Neil the name. We mean Kneel.
Yeah, and we're not talking about Jerry the King of Lawler.
Yeah,
talking about Bret Hart. In the '90s, at one of the King of the Ring. So we're talking about so when it's in the context of Superman, I've only heard one villain demand that he do that, and that one is
Well, that's kind of his catchphrase, if you will. Kneel before Zod. So.
But the other one was obviously Brainiac, because you could see the three.
Yes.
The logo, the three dots, and
yes.
So that's going to provide some interesting development for season 2 when it comes around. Mm-hmm. But is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you wanna key in on before we rate the season?
No, I really liked how, again, this was brought along. The animation was, very crisp, very clean. The lines were very clean. The movement was very realistic, despite the fairly simple designs of the characters. But it was bright and it worked. The visuals matched the type of stories that they were telling. So now you did have a few of those visual devices that, like you're talking about, like anime devices thrown in, like the character's eyes vanishing into like little dots, at times or whatever, to show us certain emotions. But I thought that it all worked very well.
Right. I think there was a good balance of, having that infusion of anime, but still looking like a superhero.
Mm-hmm.
Animated series as well. So there was a good balance there. I thought, and like I said, the way we watched the characters of both Clark Kent and Superman develop.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not fully there yet, but become closer to the fully formed version that we know and love, while also watching how the people around him, in his inner circle, interact with him. I thought it was such an enjoyable, refreshing take on all that, and I absolutely loved it. So yeah, my expectations were severely exceeded. But what would you grade this letter grade?
I would say I'd say an A-. There was very little that I didn't like. Now again, I'm going to say this, and people are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, not again." I'm just saying that since we had some space elements, that they might have mentioned a certain group of peacekeepers, intergalactic peacekeepers now and then. If they'd have thrown that out there, I would have been extra happy and maybe given it an A+, but I'm going to say A-.
Well, and did you see in that episode with Mixopedelec, there was a lantern in the museum?
Yes, there was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or the vault or whatever it was. Yeah. Yeah. So that could be something.
I think that the Daily Planet needs an illustrator. That's what I think.
Okay, so you're just trying to get Kyle Rayner on the show.
Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. It's the possibilities are endless. But I'll agree. It's an A-. Really good start. I honestly just wish. My only wish is that there were more episodes than just 10 in a season. I could have used another 3 to 5 episodes.
Yeah, it was funny because when I was talking with you earlier this week, I had a really busy morning, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have time to watch that other episode. I didn't realize that it ended last week. I thought there were 2 more episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, A- for me as well. I think it's if you're a Superman fan, long time or brand new, I think this show will appeal to you. It is respectful to the lore and the legacy of the character of Superman, but also finds a way to refresh, re-energize, and hopefully get new eyes and new fans and new wallets to work, for what DC Studios and DC Entertainment purposes to the character, and that's for any of these characters to last 80 plus years, the fan base needs to continue to grow and evolve, and I think this show will go a long way in helping this particular character continue to do that. So.
It's been almost universally positive, the reaction. Yeah. Even people who have criticisms of it, nobody's saying that they hate it.
Right, yeah.
Because, again, it's very wholesome, and it gives you a very, positive vibe.
And Superman needed this kind of a win.
Mm-hmm.
After the last decade or so. So I can't wait for season 2. And... once we have that, we'll be back to talk about it. But until then, if you want to hear or if you want to talk to Donnie or I about any of the topics we cover on this podcast network, you can on social media. Donnie, where do they find you?
You can find me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, and TikTok as the Emerald Enthusiast.
So you're not a degenerate.
Exactly. That's what you're saying. And you can also find me on my other YouTube channel, also the Emerald Enthusiast, where I do lots of product reviews, including Star Wars, wrestling, Funko, and of course Green Lantern.
Yeah, awesome. And definitely check out his action figure reviews. You know why? Because they'll make you want to buy action figures. And when is that ever a bad thing? Except for the fullness of your wallet. But I digress. If you want to find me at the Generation X, it's I've got 2 words. No, I'm kidding. It's on Twitter at Adam_LeafsFan. We've got a Facebook page for the podcast network that is listed in the description below. Click that. I will add you, and we can continue the conversation there. But until next time. remember that My Adventures of Superman, or My Adventures with Superman, is forever. From the first time Mr. Mxyzptlk shows Superman an alternate version of himself to the last. So long, everybody.
So long, everyone.